Regards, and welcome to Ryan Rambles You To Rest, the podcast where I talk at length about matters of nearly no urgent need nor heavy impact on our daily lives, in the interest of helping you there off to a more peaceful state. Well, dear resters, I have recently returned from a turn of beachy island travel. The most beachiest, islandiest travel we've done to date, I would say. From Florida, through the Caribbean, and home. It was almost the most relaxingest travel we have ever done. Normally, our style favors more off-the-path hiking and discovery, ancient or old historical sites, and always plenty of unusual and new food experiences. This trip was more of the resorty type, which I appreciate on the occasion, for the opportunity it grants simply to read and let time pass slowly. This has also set my mind a mite forward on the month of May and the encroaching summer season, as I tend to recognize kicks off with the Memorial Day weekend in the United States at the end of May. Temperatures are already getting warmer, and the days are already long at my latitude and longitude. One thing that always excites me about this time of year is that it is the beginning of the big event year, which I tend to think culminates with the U.S. Academy Awards every year in March. Then, after about 6 weeks off as viewers, we get the Eurovision Grand Final to kick off the next year of events. Eurovision is indeed my new yardstick for the event season, and it is, fairly, a few days earlier than my previous yardstick, the Cannes Film Festival in France. As you know, I am a pretty big movie buff. So the Cannes Film Festival, where so many new movies premiere every year, tends to excite me. Usually, a few of the best films of the entire year, and most of the time the first of many Oscar movies. But, in the past 4 years, I have become a growing fan of the fabulous, over-the-top showcase of international musical talent that is Eurovision. The year of this recording, 2025, the Eurovision Song Contest and the Cannes Film Festival are occurring simultaneously, with the grand final of the former occurring on May 17th, and the announcements of winners in competition of the latter occurring 1 week later on May 24th. Very, very exciting. Thusly, in this episode, we'll start things off with thoughts and ruminations from some of our rambling friends and rester reflections. Then we can consider our pair of particular ponders on the aforementioned entertainment year starting events, the Eurovision Song Contest and the Cannes Film Festival. Before we begin, I would like to recommend that you subscribe to this show on your podcast platform of choice, or YouTube, and YouTube Music. For news and announcements, follow us on Instagram at Ryan Rambles Pod and also on Blue Sky Social. Our soundtrack is by Disparition. My voice is the centerpiece sound of this podcast, and it is mostly what you hear besides the music. However, I believe it is important to recognize all of you, dear Resters. In Rester Reflections, I choose from recent comments on the YouTube channel or Spotify. Our first comment is from Dr. Habashna. They write, "Hooray! Guess who found a gem? It's me." Well, I'm very glad, Dr. Habashna, that you found this gem. At the time, that was the Great Indoors episode number 9. Welcome, dear Rester. And thank you for commenting, because your comments help other Resters find this podcast. Our next comment is from Suzanne Tite on Spotify. I am so pleased and grateful to stumble across your podcast, Ryan. It's just wonderful. This sandwich episode, my favorite so far, felt like a conversation my mind has, but this time, all I had to do is listen rather than think. Just brilliant. I am following from UK. Thanks again. Well, thank you too, Suzanne. And thank you for listening from the UK. While we were traveling the Caribbean, we were in some very UK popular places. We were briefly on St. Lucia and then spent a few days in Grenada. And so I therefore had the pleasure of speaking with a few of your fellow country people on my journey. We also flew part of the time on British Airways. But welcome from the other side of the pond. In fact, the extreme other side of the pond, because there's the pond and then there's the whole United States before you get to where I am. I'm right up on the ocean. Our next comment is from Ashley S769. Ashley writes, I was blissfully drifting off when suddenly you tossed out a ponder. Are hot dogs sandwiches? Not to mention a previous court ruling that found a burrito classified as a sandwich. Blasphemy. These are the things that keep me up at night. This needs to be discussed further. Thankfully, I was still able to fall asleep courtesy of your otherwise meandering ramblings. Heart emoji. Well, yes indeed, the subject of hot dogs as sandwiches and burritos as sandwiches is fairly or are fairly controversial. Well, perhaps this summertime we'll have a few new opportunities to encounter hot dogs and burritos wherever we go, or cook out to further ponder these conundra, as I believe many of us share them. with summertime afoot, hopefully we will find those opportunities. And perhaps on a subsequent visit, we can revisit or reconsider, or perhaps not have to go back on, but instead add to the sandwiches of summer. Our next comment from YouTube is from Leslie785, who writes, "Hi there, Ryan. How do you come up with content? I have yet to be able to listen to a full episode from you. No matter how many times I try to listen to your latest, I fall asleep so quickly and never know where to start again. You, sir, are a magician, and I am in awe. Well, thank you so much, Leslie. I'm not sure how much of a magician I am. Although reading your comment did tickle me, I thought it would be kind of exciting to have a superpower or magician ability to put people to sleep at will with my voice. Which, of course, I would only do for the purposes of good and the betterment of all people. Now, a lot of folks I know can't listen to a full episode. And I know that it can be hard to figure out where to start again, but I do include chapter information in the descriptions of each episode. On YouTube, that creates chapters in the timeline, and on some podcast platforms, those are also clickable. And then if they're not, you get a ballpark of about where you might have been when you fell asleep. In terms of how I come up with content, well, sometimes it's just what's on the horizon that I'm interested in coming up and want to share with all of you. Sometimes it's things that have occurred recently that I'm interested in. And sometimes, to be honest, I don't have a great idea. And you get things like the really random topic segment, where we just keep clicking the random article button on Wikipedia, or the scroll, where I just look at pictures of benches and tell you about them. And I do feel like it's been a little while since I've done that. So perhaps we can come back to that one soon. Our next comment is from Yoso585. Yoso writes, "If you take carrots, run them through an auger-style juicer, and then mix the juice and all the fiber back together, you'll find that you have the sweetest carrot slaw that before you could never imagine. No bitterness at all. Yum." Well, thank you for sharing this. One, because it's always good to get additional cooking advice. I like to learn more and more about cooking whenever I can. And because last episode a rester asked for recipe segments, which I haven't taken them up on yet. And maybe this pro tip on how to work with carrots and carrot juice will satisfy part of that craving. I, for one, am interested in taking this approach, as I do like to use carrots in my pasta sauces, among other things. And of course, roasted carrots from the farmer's market are very good. Thank you again. And now our final comment is from Alicia Rosowich. on Spotify. And Alicia, I am so sorry if I have brutally mangled your name. As everyone knows, I am wont to do with name mangling. You wrote, "Just found your podcast. Very relaxing, actually. Some nostalgia I hear in your voice for me. I'm very glad to hear that you find this podcast relaxing. And I'm interested in how you find the nostalgia in my voice. As I've gotten older, I have found my general thoughts and interests to be more and more nostalgic. Despite being interested in finding new things wherever I go, I also revel in the old things and the things from when I was younger. So, if my voice is nostalgic in some way for you, then I hope that it's a good thing. And if the nostalgia is more broad, then I appreciate that too, because nostalgia is, I think, a healthy part of remembering ourselves and where we come from. Thank you very much for your comment, Alicia. And I thank you all who comment and review and subscribe and like this podcast wherever you find it. Your interest and support not only warm my heart, but help more resters like yourselves find their way to this channel and podcast. Now, let us continue on our journey. As I like to say, Oscar season begins with the Cannes Film Festival in France. No matter what, several major films of the year screen at Cannes, and you can usually count on the Palme d'Or, the Cannes Best Picture, will be a nominee in some capacity at the U.S. Academy Awards. Just this past Oscars, the 97th annual, the Best Picture winner Anora was also the winner of the Palme d'Or at Cannes. The year prior, Anatomy of a Fall was Oscar nominated, as well as the year before that, Triangle of Sadness, which for my money, in the middle of the movie, had essentially a masterpiece comedy short film we like to call The Captain's Dinner. As a brief recollection to our cause, in a particular ponder we dive deeply into the details of a specific area of interest. Now, although this reduces the likelihood of a real roundabout ramble, as we sometimes experience elsewhere on this podcast, a particular ponder does well to focus one or two things. Unlike a really random topic, or the roundup, I do a little bit of scoping this out beforehand to ensure that I get only the dullest of value for you. In this particular ponder, we will cover just the history of the Cannes Film Festival, as it is laid out by collections of decades and eras, as they are curated by our intrepid and beloved historians at wikipedia.org. Knowledge is important, and wikipedia.org is one of the most robust sources of information we have available for free on the internet. I encourage all dear resters to consider a donation to Wikipedia, even at a modest $5 level. Every bit counts. Hashtag not a sponsor. The Cannes Film Festival, until 2003 called the International Film Festival, is an annual film festival held in Cannes, France, which previews new films of all genres, including documentaries, from all around the world. Founded in 1946, the invitation-only festival is held annually, usually in May. The festival was formally accredited by the FIAPF in 1951. Cannes is one of the big three major European film festivals, alongside Venice and Berlin, as well as one of the big five major international film festivals, alongside Venice, Berlin, Toronto, and Sundance. Now that's the brief introduction. I kind of forgot that it used to be called the International Film Festival, but I guess it was still always referred to as, I feel like colloquially, as the Cannes Film Festival. I always remember it being referred to as that, so I think that it's just the official title that changed, and maybe after about 50 years of people calling it the Cannes Film Festival, they just said, okay, let's change the name. But I could be wrong about that. I also thought that it was perhaps older. Founded in 1946, I guess right after the Second World War, that makes it significantly younger than the United States Academy Awards, which we learned about in a previous episode. And then I don't know if I've heard about the Venice, Berlin, and Cannes festivals referred to as the Big Three. I know they are Big Three. Or the Big Five, which include Toronto and Sundance. Of course, here in the United States, we always hear about Sundance. And maybe technically Sundance does tend to kick off the festival season, but it also tends to be in the middle of the sort of final stretch of Oscar season, and really tends to represent, the new crop that we'll see much farther down the road. Whereas I feel like Cannes tends to premiere a lot of films, and because it's in May, it generally means that you will soon have the opportunity to see those movies in a wider release, often before the Oscar stretch that takes place in November and December. Now then, let's go into the history that we came here for. The early years. The Cannes Film Festival has its origins in 1938, when Jean Zay, the French Prime Minister of National Education, on the proposal of high-ranking official and historian Philippe Erlanger and film journalist Robert Favre Lebret, decided to set up an international cinematographic festival. They found the support of the Americans and the British. Okay, so we're definitely seeing the beginnings of the festival beginning to take shape before the Second World War, or before its conclusion at the least. Its creation can be largely attributed to the French desire to compete with the Venice Film Festival, which at the time was the only international film festival that had shown a lack of impartiality with its fascist bias during those years. The political interference seemed evident in the 1937 edition when Benito Mussolini meddled to ensure that French pacifist film La Grande Illusion would not win. So interesting that the Cannes Film Festival ostensibly began as a reaction to a more fascist control of the Venice Film Festival. Well, we'll perhaps need to come back and review the Venice Film Festival to get a little bit more detail on that front. So, world politics figuring in, and perhaps significantly a certain amount of perhaps French arrogance about should have won the Venice Film Festival. I guess if we can't win yours, we'll win ours next time. We'll be talking about Eurovision a little later on, but I feel like there have been more than one attempt at, if not soon to be more attempts at, creating an alternative to Eurovision that the United States is allowed to participate in. The last straw was in the 1938 event when Mussolini and Adolf Hitler respectively overruled the jury's decision in order to award the Coppa Mussolini, the Mussolini Cup, for the best film to Italian war film Luciano Serra, Pilot, produced under the supervision of Mussolini's son, and the Coppa Mussolini for the best foreign film to Olympia, a German documentary film about the Berlin 1936 Summer Olympics, produced in association with the Nazi Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, despite the fact that the regulations at the time prohibited awarding a documentary. Well, that's somewhat interesting on its own, that they further broke the rules of allowing a documentary film to win. I think today we would generally think that a film of any particular format or genre should be eligible to win a Best of Festival award. So that seems like it would have been somewhat fair. But in any case, the apparent meddling, as alleged by this article, wasn't that it was because it was a documentary or that it was so much better than the other films. Moving on. Outraged by the decision and as a measure of protest, the French, British, and American jury members decided to withdraw from the festival with the intention of not returning. This snub encouraged the French to found a free festival. Thus, on 31 May 1939, the city of Cannes was finally selected as the location of the festival over Biarritz, and the town hall, along with the French government, signed the International Film Festival's official birth certificate with the name of Le Festival International du Film. So there you have it. The written agreement to begin the film festival goes back to 1939. And for those scholars of cinema, that's also a note toward really not that long after sound began. But if I remember correctly, we are still a good stretch of up to perhaps 10 years since the Academy Awards began. The reason for deciding Cannes was because of its touristic appeal as a French Riviera resort town, and also because the City Hall offered to increase the municipality's financial participation, including the commitment of building a dedicated venue for the event. Well, that always helps if you're trying to get your city chosen for something, offering to build a thing, which we now know is part of the measure of insanity that comes with any city agreeing to host Olympics. And we'll probably have some opportunity to talk about that over the next year as the Olympics prepare to come to Los Angeles, California. Hollywood stars of the moment like Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, Tyrone Power, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Marlene Dietrich, Mae West, Norma Shearer, Paul Muni, James Cagney, Spencer Tracy, and George Raft arrived thanks to an ocean liner chartered by MGM. On 31 August, the opening night gala took place with the private screening of the American film, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, starring Charles Laughton and Maureen O'Hara, and directed by William Dieterle. The next day, on 1 September, German troops invaded Poland. As a result, the festival was postponed for 10 days, and it would be resumed if the circumstances allowed it. However, the situation only worsened, and on 3 September, France and the United Kingdom declared war against Germany, sparking the Second World War. The French government ordered a general mobilization, and this prevented the festival from continuing, so it was finally canceled. Now that's really interesting. So, the generally accepted beginning of the Cannes Film Festival is in 1946, after the war. But you can make the case that the first Cannes Film Festival happened at the same time that World War II began, in mere days. The first screening was on the 31st of August, and the next day Germany invaded Poland. So then I believe we will have a pause for the Second World War to take place, and we move over now into 1946. The festival was relaunched, and from 20 September to 5 October 1946, 21 countries presented their films at the first Cannes International Film Festival. Well, there it is called the first Cannes International Film Festival. which took place at the former Casino of Cannes. So it sounds like they didn't build the dedicated venue while the war was happening. And it's also interesting to note here that they kept the late in year date a little bit. Like the first one began on August 31st, and then this technically first full one began on 20 September in 1946. And of course, as we've talked about already on this podcast, that the festival now takes place in May. In 1947, amid serious problems of efficiency, the festival was held as the Festival du Film de Cannes, or Cannes, where films from 16 countries were presented. The festival was not held in 1948 and 1950 due to budgetary problems. So the first 4 to 5 opportunities for the Cannes Film Festival were a little bumpy, it seems. You have the first one that was canceled 3 days after it started. Then you have the first official one, or what is being called the first Cannes International Film Festival, with 21 participants. And here it doesn't say very much about how that went, except that the festival changed names the immediate next year amid, quote, serious problems of efficiency, and had 5 fewer countries represented, although it's not clear why that would be, and or whether that's related to matters of efficiency. And then for 3 more years, or for 2 more years, simply not held in 1948 and 1950. There is a little color here about 1949. We should not delay. In 1949, the Palais des Festivals was expressly constructed for the occasion on the seafront promenade of La Croisette, although its inaugural roof, while still unfinished, blew off during a storm. Boy, yeah, the early years of the Cannes Film Festival really are fraught with issues. The roof of the main venue blew off during a storm. So 1947 went so bad that they canceled 1948. And then for 1949, they were trying to bring it back, but the roof blew off of the movie theater. So they had to cancel that, and 1950 due to budgetary problems. And here comes that payoff we were looking for. In 1951, the festival was moved to spring to avoid direct competition with the Venice Film Festival, which was held in autumn. So at the end of it all, the Cannes Film Festival was started as a spite festival with good cause, and in the end just had to become its own thing. That's some very interesting early Cannes Festival history right there. Next, we'll be looking into the 1950s and 1960s. Now, of course, we know of the 1950s that they began with moving the festival to the springtime. Let's see what else, and if the woes of the early years of the festival have subsided. During the early 1950s, the festival attracted more tourism and press attention, with showbiz scandals and high-profile personalities as love affairs. At the same time, the artistic aspect of the festival started developing. Because of controversies over the selection of films, the Critics' Prize was created for the recognition of original films and daring filmmakers. In 1954, the Special Jury Prize was awarded for the first time. In 1955, the Palme d'Or was created, replacing the Grand Prix du Festival, which had been given until that year. In 1957, Dolores Del Rio was the first female member of the jury for the official selection. So, the Palme d'Or was created, we'll ballpark it at about 8 in, and there was a Grand Prix du Festival before that. It sounds like it just got rebranded. And then Dolores Del Rio is the first female member of the jury. I think, although I'm not positive, that the first female director of the jury was relatively recent, but I also read that there's been several women overseeing the jury for the last few years. In fact, I think we have 2 years in a row, this year, 2025, and last year, 2024, when Greta Gerwig was in charge. In 1959, the Marche du Film, or Marque du Film perhaps, the film market, was founded, giving the festival a commercial character and facilitating exchanges between sellers and buyers in the film industry. Today, it has become the first international platform for film commerce. Still, in the 1950s, some outstanding films, like Night and Fog in 1956 and Hiroshima Mon Amour in 1959, were excluded from the competition for diplomatic concerns. So still 10 years on from more than 10 years on from World War II, there were concerns about revisiting and discussing it in the film space. Jean Cocteau, 3 times president of the jury in those years, is quoted to have said, "The Cannes Festival should be a no-man's land in which politics has no place. It should be a simple meeting between friends." That's interesting. There's often throughout time, and even to this day, dialogue about excluding politics from entertainment or art, which to me is a somewhat ludicrous concept, because art and entertainment are a reflection of the world in which we live, of which politics is one component. A film can choose not to focus on politics, but to imagine that politics has no place is, I think, a bit cynical. And maybe coming from Cocteau, not totally surprising, but I'm enough years separated from film school that I don't remember much about Cocteau, other than his films being more on the surrealist side. But in a still relatively recent post-war world, I suppose it can be somewhat understandable and forgiven that the interest would be in not focusing on politics. In 1962, the International Critics Week was born, created by the French Union of Film Critics as the first parallel section of the Cannes Film Festival. Its goal was to showcase first and second works by directors from all over the world, not succumbing to commercial tendencies. In 1965, Olivia de Havilland was named the first female president of the jury, while the next year Sophia Loren became president. Okay. So, the history of women presiding over the jury is definitely older than I thought, and with perhaps more frequency. But I would again have to delve deeper into the history. I mean, we're here in the history, but of that specific subject, we don't know how much more we'll get. In 1968, the festival was halted on 19 May. Some directors, such as Carlos Saura and Milos Forman, had withdrawn their films from the competition. On 18 May, filmmaker Louis Malle, along with a group of directors, took over the large room of the Palais and interrupted the projections in solidarity with students and labor on strike throughout France, and in protest to the eviction of the then president of the Cinémathèque Française. The filmmakers achieved the reinstatement of the president, and they founded the Film Directors' Society that same year. So much for keeping politics out of the film festival, Jean Cocteau. In 1969, the SRF, led by Pierre-Henri Delot, created the Directors' Fortnight, a new, non-competitive section that programs a selection of films from around the world, distinguished by the independent judgment displayed in the choice of films. Okay, so Directors' Fortnight is from 1969. And that is still a feature of the Cannes Film Festival today. Making it somewhere in the neighborhood of 60, a little less than 60 years old. So at this point, by 1969, we're 30 years since the inking of the idea and the false start of the Cannes Film Festival. And 30 years later, we're now seeing that it has become very much the festival we know today. And that concludes the 1950s and 1960s for the Cannes Film So now we've gotten to the 1970s, where film very much starts to change in the United States with the Brat Pack and reactions to the U.S. war in Vietnam, which was also part of French history. During the 1970s, important changes occurred in the festival. In 1972, Robert Favre-Lebret was named the new president, and Maurice Bessy the general delegate. He introduced important changes in the selection of the participating films, welcoming new techniques, and relieving the selection from diplomatic pressures, with films like MASH, and later Chronicle of the Years of Fire, marking this turn. In some cases, these changes helped directors like Andrei Tarkovsky overcome problems of censorship in their own country. Also, until that time, the different countries chose the film that would represent them in the festival. Yet in 1972, Bessy created a committee to select French films and another for foreign films. So, up until the 1970s, the submission into the festival was one film at a time, similar to what we will see about Eurovision shortly, but also similar to how international or non-English films are selected for the U.S. Academy Awards. And here too some other side interesting things. I didn't know about the problems of censorship in Soviet cinema. I'm not totally surprised, but I didn't know to what extent, or still don't know, to what extent Tarkovsky's films were censored. I've always been a bit of a Tarkovsky fan in appreciating the existence of his films. Tarkovsky, for U.S. film students, is very much a film school director, in that the films are very dense, long, slow, nuanced, sometimes steeped enough in their Russian and Soviet culture that they're difficult to decipher. And mostly, ultimately, very much worth experiencing. If you happen to have the opportunity to see an Andrei Tarkovsky film in a theater, you definitely owe it to yourself to take the opportunity. It is sort of the quintessential height to which we would talk about art films and generally slow movies. Which is part of the reason why it will benefit you to see it in the movie theater, where you can't escape easily. You'll be stuck in your chair and have to watch it, or confront yourself with the possibility of taking a nap. Perhaps I can come back to Andrei Tarkovsky as a subject matter, given that Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast, proceeds with the goal of helping you fall asleep. And while I wouldn't say that Andrei Tarkovsky's films are intentional in that regard, they can have that effect depending on when you attempt to watch them, and in what sort of company. For example, you might watch an Andrei Tarkovsky movie later in the evening at home on Blu-ray to fall asleep. In 1978, Gilles Jacob assumed the position of General Delegate, introducing the Camera d'Or Award for the best film of any of the main events, and the Un Certain Regard section for the non-competitive categories. Other changes were the decrease of length of the festival down to 13 days, thus reducing the number of selected films. Also, until that point, the jury was composed by film academics, and Jacob started to introduce celebrities and professionals from the film industry. Okay, so now, as we're talking about it, another decade on from the beginning of the Cannes Film Festival, now we are 40 years deep. The festival had previously been all academic or film academics. It doesn't say exactly what that means here, but that would probably be writers on the subject of film, journalists, critics, and so on and so forth. And so somewhere along the way, they decided that the winners of the awards should be chosen by more than just the academics. And I guess technically for the short period of time that films were being submitted and chosen rather than submitted by countries as a sole entry, that period of time would have been, I guess, just these film academics. In 1983, a new, much bigger Palais de Festival was built to host the festival, while the directors' fortnight remained in the old building. The new building was nicknamed the Bunker, provoking much criticism, especially since it was hardly finished at the event and several technical problems occurred. The woes of the Cannes Film Festival of so long ago have resurfaced in 1983 here, with technical problems at the new venue, although this time without the roof blowing away in a storm. In 1984, Pierre Viau replaced Robert Favre-Lebret as president of the festival. In his term, the festival started including films from more countries, like Philippines, China, Cuba, Australia, India, New Zealand, and Argentina. So the article hasn't been to this point explicit about the exclusion of other countries and which countries were excluded. The implication earlier on at the very beginning of this did talk about the first, quote-unquote, first festival having 21 or 22 countries submit films and then 16 the following year, but so far hasn't said anything about where the films are allowed to be from. And so, taking us to 1984, some 40 years ago, is how recently these other countries were allowed to even participate, is what it sounds like. That the Cannes International Film Festival until 1984 was less international. And here too doesn't say that they opened it up to all countries. In 1987, for the first time of the festival, a red carpet was placed at the entrance of the Palais. In 1989, during the first Cinema and Liberté Forum, 100 directors from many countries signed a declaration, quote, against all forms of censorship still existing in the world. So the 70s and 80s really were, as promised, very much these primary developmental decades for the Cannes Film Festival, which at this point was not super young anymore. Conceptually had been around since the 30s, so almost 50 years on that it sort of reached the form as we know it. It makes me wonder whether there was an analog to ourselves in the 70s that look forward to news of Cannes to kick off the Oscar season in their minds. And it sounds as though the point at which they might feel that way was reaching a culmination by the end of the 1980s, which seems appropriate because it wasn't long after the 1980s that yours truly began to look at the Cannes Film Festival as the beginning of the Oscar season. It was throughout the 90s that I got more and more interested in film and the world of film outside of the United States. So let's depart from the 1970s and 1980s and find out what that period of time held for the Cannes Film Festival. The next section is 1990s to present, and full disclosure, more or less skips over the entire decade of the 1990s. And it appears to be as well a generally truncated period in history for the Cannes Film Festival as far as Wikipedia is concerned. This seems to me as though this would be a good part of the history of the Cannes Film Festival for an intrepid Wikipedian to flesh out more, as surely throughout the 1990s and on into the early 2000s there would be likely more significant history, but I can see just with my eyeballs at the moment that we go from entering the 1990s all the way to 2020 in just 2 paragraphs. Which means we are also then and therefore approaching the end of the history of the Cannes Film Festival as it is available to us. In 1998, Gilles Jacob created the last section of the official selection, La Cine Fondation, and I probably completely mangled that, aiming to support the creation of works of cinema in the world and to contribute to the entry of the new scenario writers in the circle of the celebrities. The Cine Fondation was completed in 2000 with La Résidence, where young directors could refine their writing and screenplays, and in 2005, L'Atelier, which helps 20 directors per year with the funding of their films. Gilles Jacob was appointed honorary president in 2000, and in 2002, the festival officially adopted the name Festival de Cannes. At long last. So the late 90s, early 2000s, here just a couple of years mentioned. It's interesting to see that the festival became focused on encouraging new filmmakers and focusing on nurturing talent. This doesn't define too many specifics of that period of time, but it is always good to see a steering in a direction to support more film and more cinema. During the 2000s, the festival started focusing more on the technological advances taking place in the film world, especially the digital techniques. In 2004, the restored historical films of the festival were presented as Cannes Classics, which included documentaries. In 2007, Thierry Frémaux became general delegate. In 2009, he extended the festival in Buenos Aires as La Semana de Cine del Festival de Cannes, and in 2010, he created the Cannes Court Métrage for the short film competition. I wonder the detail on this part of the early 2000s about technological advances in digital techniques. That's a very vague statement. It doesn't explain very much. Today, of course, just about everything is produced in a digital format, and in fact, everything is almost exclusively screened in a digital format, with occasional exceptions, such as a movie like Oppenheimer, which was shot in 70mm and projected in 70mm, although undoubtedly edited and finalized in a digital environment before being printed back out to film. There was this period of time in the early 2000s as digital was getting better and better, but not quite good enough, that there was a almost war within the industry about the use of digital capture, that it was imperfect or it could degrade, or in complete fairness, the resolution, the native resolution of digital cameras, even for major productions at that time, were inferior to film resolution, or not so much the resolution, but the latent information in the film itself. And so, for example, the first 3 Star Wars movies, the episodes 1, 2, and 3 that came out around that time, were all captured in a digital format, and somewhat ironically, they are frozen in that quality of digital capture forever, whereas the original 3 movies, the 4, 5, and 6 episodes that were shot in the 70s and 80s on film, have more information in their film negative than the newer digital movies, such that the older films could be shown in higher resolution than the newer films. It's an odd thing with the birth pangs of digital cinema that this is the case, but it is an interesting one. And it was yet quite some time before the depth of color and contrast was very suitable for theatrical presentation, both in the capture at the time of making a movie, but also in the exhibition. The quality of digital projectors took time to get better. And even some movies were shot digitally and then printed to film so that they could appear in more movie theaters back when film projection was the main projection everywhere. And in those cases, many of those movies did not look very good going from digital to film. One somewhat famous version of that would be David Lynch's Inland Empire, although in that case it was a little bit of a experimental test on his part to shoot with non-state-of-the-art digital cameras at the time to make his movie and then have it printed to film. Well, all of that seems a bit of a digression, but I suppose it's okay because of how generally lacking in major information this article has up through 2020 from 1990. And in total fairness, of course, this is the history section of a much larger Wikipedia article. On 20 March 2020, organizers announced the postponement of the Cannes Film Festival 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The festival was later canceled outright. Spike Lee, director of Do the Right Thing and Black Klansman, had been chosen to lead the jury panel. In 2019, the jury panel had been led by Alejandro González Iñárritu, director of Birdman. Lee was later invited to head the jury of the 2021 Cannes Film Festival, held in July of that year. So it seems like it came close to Spike Lee not being able to preside over the jury in 2020, and then it came back later for him, which is somewhat interesting in that there was some bit of social media buzz when the films in competition were announced recently, that Spike Lee's latest film was not included among those films, but that he announced it would still be screening at Cannes. I'm not super clear on how all of the different things work in terms of in and out of competition. Obviously, we've learned about several additional festival programs that occur that do not include competition. However, there isn't a great deal of detail about how those are separated out and why. In 2022, the festival denied press accreditation to Russian journalists associated with outlets who were not opposed to the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war. On the opening night of the festival, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, made a video appearance where he talked about the war and the role of cinema in it. That is interesting. I have not heard about that, or maybe I forgot about it, and have not seen the video, but will perhaps try to track it down if it is available online. Iris Knobloch was elected the first woman president of the festival in the same year, succeeding the co-founder and former head of French pay TV operator Canal Plus, Pierre Lesecure, who has served since 2014. I guess, to be completely honest, I haven't been very clear myself on the various roles of power in the Cannes Film Festival and what the general delegate is versus what the president is, and so on. And the director of the jury versus the president of the jury. Maybe those are the same thing. And that's what there is here for the history of the Cannes Film Festival. It's definitely an interesting history, although this seems to leave quite a lot out in terms of milestones and important films, and even detail on some of the changes that occurred to the festival throughout the years. Perhaps for another episode of Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast, we may be able to find yet another history of Cannes source that might color in some of these details. Now, if that's something that would interest you, let me know. But otherwise, that was certainly an interesting journey through the history of the Cannes Film Festival, which, once again, is just around the corner at the time of this recording. Do you like the Cannes Film Festival? Or another film festival? Or film festivals in general? As I am recording this, there is a film festival happening where I live at this moment, and at the time of this recording, I am just a couple hours away from seeing a film at the festival. So if film festivals are of interest to you, let me know. A pair of our friends, who now live full-time in Europe, introduced us to the Eurovision Song Contest one spring or summer a few years back. I had always been sort of aware of its reputation for bombast, and was very skeptical I would enjoy the cavalcade of theatrics and pop music. And I had no idea that the process of determining the winner would be through an arduous pageant of participating nations and a separate live audience ballot. But, in total, it was an incredible experience to behold, a variety concert for which the message, ultimately, is respect, decency, dignity, and peace for all people, or at least all nations eligible to participate. Ever since, I have looked forward to each year's Eurovision Grand Final. I mainly pay attention just to the big night, although it really is a drawn-out process of getting to the finale. You could certainly concern yourself with learning all the songs and following the drama as nations choose their representatives, and the committee then whittles them down to the final participants. The big night is truly the thing to witness. In the modern contest, all participants are backed by some of the most incredible and dazzling stagecraft you will ever see. And that is in part what makes it incredible to watch on TV. Even if you don't care for the music, you'll be entertained by the spectacle. So now let us progress into the beginning of our journey, an introduction to Eurovision. The Eurovision Song Contest, and not to take a left turn immediately, but there is a French version of the name of the contest here. I am going to skip it because I think we've all had our fair share of my bad French pronunciations in the previous particular ponder about the Cannes Film Festival. Often known simply as Eurovision, is an international song competition organized annually by the European Broadcast Union among its members. Each participating broadcaster submits an original song representing its country to be performed and broadcast live to all of them via the Eurovision and Euroradio networks, and then casts votes for the other countries' songs to determine a winner. Well, right off the bat, my interpretation of this suggests that the wording of this, and perhaps we'll get deeper clarification further on, would be that the broadcaster submits a song representing its company, its country, which is how this is written, suggesting that one way of looking at this might be as a competition of television stations or broadcasters. It may be some particular nuance of the writing here that I'm missing, but I was under the impression that there was something more nationally representative than simply a broadcaster choosing a band or song to represent the country. This is not to say that I was under the impression that perhaps the main leaders of the country would be making the decision, for example. That's not what I had in mind. But thinking back as well to the matter of Cannes, and in a previous episode, our exploration of the history of the Academy Awards, all of these festivals and competitions have submissions from other countries, and most often the wording suggests that the country, in some abstract, chooses the representative. Of course, there would have to be a committee in every case, appointed in some fashion or voted upon. But the wording here for Eurovision, saying broadcaster, definitely offers up the possibility of really an independent television network being in charge of the representation of a nation. Now, it has been around long enough that I imagine just about every country has more or less ironed this out. And I'm guessing that the centralized European Broadcasting Union itself, if it is indeed centralized, brings some matter of organization and rules of its own to the determination process that might leave out the ability for broadcasters and therefore their sponsors to have undue influence. The contest was inspired by and based on the Italian Sanremo music festival held in the Italian Riviera since 1951. Well, I've never heard of this Italian music festival, which was allegedly the inspiration for Eurovision. But perhaps this is another avenue we can explore in another episode of Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast. Eurovision has been held annually since 1956, except for 2020 due to the COVID-19 restrictions, making it the longest-running international music competition on television and one of the world's longest-running television programs. Active members of the EBU and invited associate members are eligible to compete. As of 2024, broadcasters from 52 countries have participated at least once. Each participating broadcaster sends an original song of 3 minutes duration or less to be performed by a singer or group of up to 6 people, aged 16 or older, of its choice. So right off the bat, you can see just how confined the competition begins. 3 minutes or less is a pretty major restriction for a lot of modern music. Most of the music I listen to runs over 3 minutes for sure. I can think of only one band that I've listened to somewhat regularly for the last maybe 10 to 20 years, which had consistently short enough songs, and that would be Guided by Voices. And then the group limit being 6 is interesting too. I feel like I've seen more than 6 people on stage, which makes me think maybe there's an additional allowance for extra performers, because some have dancers involved that aren't necessarily band members. And I don't know if this intro will cover all of the rules in very much detail. We might need to return to Eurovision another time to get the full big picture of how the rules work. Each country awards 1 to 8, 10, and 12 points to their 10 favorite songs based on the views of an assembled group of music professionals and their viewing public, with the song receiving the most points declared the winner. And as I said, it's interesting to endure the entire competition. I can't say honestly that we have. Usually watching it in the US, you need to avoid spoilers online because Eurovision happens earlier in the day for the United States audience, and often we'll watch a replay of it at night when we have friends over or go to see friends to watch the event. The upside of that is that we can fast forward, and even though we will be past the point where we could participate in voting, I think maybe last year they opened up online voting to outside of the countries participating, meaning that U.S. viewers could participate in the voting. Although, don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% positive. In any case, it is somewhat beneficial to be able to fast forward because the voting does take a very long time. It happens in real time. After everyone has performed. So you can imagine there's this pageantry of announcing each final vote from each country. It's a little similar to what the United States does for the first night of its NFL draft, where there's a big stage and it's broadcast and you wait for each team of the 32 NFL teams to pick their first player choice of the year, and it takes a really long time. So does this. So having it recorded in the context of having fun with friends or family to watch it is helpful when you're just ready to go on and see who won. And also, sometimes there's a performance or two that you don't feel like you want to watch all of. Other performances feature alongside the competition, including specially commissioned opening and interval acts, and guest performances by musicians and other personalities, with past acts including Cirque du Soleil, Madonna, Justin Timberlake, Mika, Rita Ora, and the first performance of Riverdance. Now, I will say from the only couple of years that I've watched Eurovision, I don't recall these side performances as being part of the modern experience, but I can't say for certain that I would know better either. Originally consisting of a single evening event, the contest has expanded as broadcasters from new countries joined, including countries outside of Europe such as Israel and Australia, leading to the introduction of relegation procedures in the 1990s, before the creation of the semifinals in the 2000s. As of 2024, Germany has competed more times than any other country, having participated in all but one edition, while Ireland and Sweden both hold the record for the most victories, with 7 wins each. in total. So there you go. That's interesting. Ireland and Sweden with the most wins, which I suppose if you were to make a contest out of predicting winners, you would likely want to bet Ireland or Sweden if it was a blind betting competition. And if there was some way that you could choose more than one, perhaps you would choose them both. Or do a little research and choose one of them in addition to your researched guess. That, I suppose, is a little bit too much of a digression for predicting theory. Traditionally held in the country that won the preceding year's event, meaning that the winner of one year will be the hosting country the next year. The contest provides an opportunity to promote the host country and city as a tourist destination, somewhat similar to how the Olympics are. But I do think that having a musical performance is more likely to be less of a burden for any given host country than hosting all of the Olympics, which usually requires building stadiums and facilities. That said, the tourist impact of Eurovision can be a burden, I'm sure, and it is likely still that even if you have a venue, you may need to set up a bigger one or repair one, or who knows. Prestigious perhaps, but a burden also perhaps. Thousands of spectators attend each year, along with journalists who cover all aspects of the contest, including rehearsals in venue, press conferences with the competing acts, in addition to other related events and performances in the host city. Alongside the generic Eurovision logo, a unique theme is typically developed for each event. The contest aired in countries across all continents. It has been available online via the official Eurovision website since 2001. Eurovision ranks among the world's most watched non-sporting events every year, with hundreds of millions of viewers globally. Performing at the contest has often provided artists with a local career boost and, in some cases, long-lasting international success. Several of the best-selling music artists in the world have competed in past editions, including ABBA, Celine Dion, Julio Iglesias, Cliff Richard, and Olivia Newton-John. Some of the world's best-selling singles have received their first international performance on the Eurovision stage. Yes, in particular, ABBA's career is famously known to have begun with Eurovision. While having gained popularity with the viewing public in both participating and non-participating countries, the contest has also been the subject of criticism for its artistic quality as well as a perceived political aspect to the event. Concerns have been raised regarding political friendships and rivalries between countries potentially having an impact on the results. Before I go any further, I would like to humbly submit the position that is precisely the idea. I think that if we could compartmentalize these petty political rivalries between various nations into the Eurovision Song Contest, rather than on the battlefield at the cost of human life and livelihood, then that is the better result. So let it be that Eurovision has a political aspect, and let it be that those nations express their rivalry through song. Controversial moments have included participating broadcasters withdrawing at a late stage, censorship of broadcast segments by broadcasters, as well as political events impacting participation. The contest has also been criticized for an overabundance of elaborate stage shows at the cost of artistic merit. Now, I leave it to each of you, dear resters, who already watch the Eurovision Song Contest, and those who might now take it upon themselves to do so. I leave it to you to decide whether the artistic merit is traded for elaborate stage shows, although I feel somewhat as though it's expected that the bombast is bigger than the art, and there are some beautiful and fun and interesting music. But at the end of the day, we are here to be impressed and entertained. Eurovision has, however, gained popularity for its camp appeal. This is what I'm saying. It is very entertaining. Its musical span of ethnic and international styles, also very good. Also very good. You get to see all of these different countries represented, as well as emergence as part of LGBTQ culture, resulting in a large, active fan base and an influence on popular culture. Indeed. The popularity of the contest has led to the creation of several similar events, either organized by the EBU or created by external organizations. Several special events have been organized by the EBU to celebrate select anniversaries, or as a replacement due to cancellation. And that is your relatively detailed, brief overview and introduction to Eurovision, or the Eurovision Song Contest. Now, once again, if you ask me, all of those things that are controversial are some of the best things about it. The politics, the camp, the inclusion of LGBTQ, and any culture. It is a celebration of the array of humanity, rather than a condemnation. And so the second half of this Eurovision particular ponder is on the origins and history. It has a little bit of context that we've already gotten from the intro, from a brief glance, but it does also give us some more detail. Let's dive in. The European Broadcasting Union was formed in 1950 among 23 broadcasting organizations. The word Eurovision was first used by British journalist George Campy in the Evening Standard in 1951 when he referred to a British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, program being relayed by Dutch television. Following several events broadcast internationally via their Eurovision transmission network in the early 1950s, including the coronation of Elizabeth II in 1953, an EBU committee headed by Marcel Benzenson was formed in January 1955 to investigate new initiatives for cooperation between broadcasters, which approved for further study a European song competition from an idea initially proposed by Radio Televisione Italiana manager Sergio Pugliese, or Pugliese, or Pugliese, Sergio Pugliese, Pugliese. The EBU's General Assembly agreed to the organizing of the song contest in October 1955, under the initial title of the European Grand Prix, and accepted a proposal by the Swiss Broadcasting Corporation to host the event in Lugano in the spring of 1956. The Italian Sanremo Music Festival, held since 1951, was used as a basis for the initial planning of the contest, with several amendments and additions given its international nature. The Eurovision Song Contest was developed as a way of putting transnational live television to the test, promoting television as well as encouraging the production of original songs. I must confess that I was under the impression that the genesis of the Eurovision Song Contest was a little bit more officially tied to its relationship to post-war Europe as a reaction to World War II, or reaction to even ongoing tensions. As we know, this doesn't officially begin until more than a decade after the end of World War II. I did think it was more closely related, just as we saw with the Cannes Film Festival, that the existence of the festival was somewhat debatably connected to a reaction to the growing and spreading fascism in Europe. And here instead we learn that the song contest was more officially related to unifying broadcasting across Europe. So still an effort to unify and to get television spread more evenly across the continent. And by unifying the stations and getting them to cooperate and thinking that this song contest would bring them together all seems extremely intelligent. But it is interesting, and it does explain, as we were reading at the beginning of all of this, why it refers to broadcasters submitting, because this was always a union of broadcasters, the EBU. The light bulb goes on for Ryan. Broadcasters from 7 countries participated in the first contest, with each country represented by 2 songs, the only time in which multiple entries per country were permitted. So that is also very interesting. Similar to how the Academy Awards started out very differently, as we learned that multiple movies could be submitted for the same actor, for example. The winning song was Refrain, representing the host country, Switzerland, and performed by Liz Asia, or Liz Asia. Voting during the first contest was held behind closed doors, with only the winner being announced on stage. The use of a scoreboard and public announcement of the voting, inspired by the BBC's Festival of Popular British Songs, began in 1957. Also interesting, so the first event had voting behind closed doors, and then, inspired by a British show, they went into public scoring. And I will say that thorough arduousness I talked about earlier is, in fairness, somewhat interesting, because you're always watching the score tick up as you go. If you really wanted to just spend that part of your time with friends, talking and maybe having dinner while it's going in the background, you certainly could. The tradition of the winning broadcaster hosting the following year's contest, which has since become a standard feature of the event, began in 1958. Technological developments have transformed the contest. Color broadcasts began in 1968, satellite broadcasts in 1955, and streaming in 2000s. Broadcasts in widescreen began in 2005 and in high definition in 2007, with ultra-high definition tested for the first time in 2022. And so my experience of Eurovision is very fairly following all of these technological innovations. And I will say once again, as I have several times to this point, the spectacle is worth it. And with all of this technology, the spectacle is just incredible for live television. By the 1960s, between 16 and 18 countries were regularly competing each year. Countries from outside the traditional boundaries of Europe began entering the contest, and countries in Western Asia and North Africa started competing in the 1970s and 1980s. Apart from Yugoslavia, a member of the non-alignment movement and not seen as part of the Eastern Bloc at the time, no socialist or communist country ever participated. Only after the end of the Cold War did other countries from Central and Eastern Europe participate for the first time. Some of those countries have gained or regained their independence in the course of the breakup of Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union. As a consequence, more broadcasters were now applying than could feasibly participate in a one-night event of reasonable length. So as all of those nations were split up, they ran into the problem that the Oscars have, which is too darn long. Numerous solutions to this problem were tried over the years, and I'm guessing not altogether successfully. The 1993 contest included a contest called, I'm going to sort of say this, Kvalifikacja za Millstreet, which was a pre-qualifying round for 7 of these new countries. And from 1994, relegation systems were introduced to manage the number of competing entries, with the poorest performing countries barred from entering the following year's contest. And I'm guessing that that means the countries which had the worst performances were barred from the next year, not that the countries which were performing that were the poorest were barred from following year attendance. From 2004, the contest expanded to become a multi-program event with a semifinal at the 49th contest, allowing all interested companies to compete each year. A second semifinal was added to each edition from 2008. So that's more of the Eurovision that I'm somewhat familiar with. That it is a multi-tier song competition, and the performers have to compete in, an ever whittling down contest. And each time I think the performance can get a little bit more sophisticated. I know at this point they're also producing music videos. But if you look at, if you go back in time, you can look at some of the semifinal performances and then go ahead and compare that to the spectacle of the final one. And you'll see they're pretty different once they're finally choreographed and filled with special effects. There have been 68 contests as of 2024, making Eurovision the longest-running annual international televised music competition, as determined by Guinness World Records. Now, that does stack up, we think. It is a series of very specific informations. Annual, international, televised music competition. The contest has been listed as one of the longest-running television programs in the world and among the world's most watched non-sporting events, which we think it might be up there with the U.S. Academy Awards for non-sporting. And I should say, I don't think it's waning in popularity the way that the Academy Awards have. Broadcasters from a total of 52 countries have taken part in at least one edition, with a record 43 countries participating in a single contest, first in 2008 and subsequently in 2011 and 2018. So you can see how from somewhat humble beginnings this Eurovision contest really has blossomed and gotten so much bigger. 43 countries participating in a single event. Or, to be correct about the way I'm saying it, participated in a single Eurovision Song Contest. They didn't necessarily make it to the final. Eurovision had been held every year until 2020, when the year's contest was cancelled in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. No competitive event was able to take place due to uncertainty caused by the spread of the virus in Europe and the various restrictions imposed by the governments of the participating countries. In its place, a special broadcast, Eurovision: Europe Shine a Light, was produced by the organizers, which honored the songs and artists that would have competed in 2020, but in a non-competitive format. So even with the COVID pandemic and just that first year of it, they still came up with a solution to satisfy the presence of Eurovision. I didn't see that, so maybe I'll have to go back. Well, in any case, there we have the main history of the Eurovision Song Contest. This article in wikipedia.org is actually quite extensive, and there is a lot more to learn about the Eurovision Song Contest. A friendly reminder to all you enthused, and hopefully not too enthused at this time, about the Eurovision Song Contest. Recall that the spectacular grand finale will be May 17th of this year, 2025. Are you a fan of Eurovision already? Are you going to watch it this year? Or, if you are listening to this after the fact, have you watched it, and how do you feel about the Eurovision Song Contest? Let me know. I think we'll leave it here for this episode. I do very much hope that you have been adequately rambled to rest, and that you are not hearing what I am saying at this time. However, if for any reason you are still awake at this time, I will leave you, dear rester, with these parting words. Brash, blushing, tasteless, houses, tap, street, grandiose, home, past, and flawless. Thank you again. I am your host, Ryan. Music has been by Disparition. And until we are together again, may your days be stress-free and your nights be restful.